On this Sunday night, Moscow mourns. The death toll rises after Russia's worst terror attack in decades. Plus, Putin tries to blame Ukraine as Russia launches a devastating wave of airstrikes. Also tonight, the growing fears of imminent famine in Gaza.
It's time to truly flood Gaza with life-saving aid.
As hopes for a ceasefire fade, Israel dispatches its defense minister to Washington. Colorectal cancer warning.
If I had waited till I was 50 years old, I wouldn't be alive to be speaking with you right now.
The new push to dramatically lower the age for life-saving screening. And reeling from eeling.
Every night we witness illegal activities. It's frustrating.
How illegal fishing has left a once lucrative industry high and dry.
Global National with Farah Nasser. Reporting tonight, Jackson Prosco.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. We begin with a show of resilience in the face of grief. Today, Russians united for a national day of mourning, honoring the lives lost during Friday's terror attack at a packed rock concert in Moscow. Thousands gathered at a makeshift memorial outside Crocus City Hall and elsewhere across Russia, laying flowers for the 137 victims killed after 4 armed men opened fire inside the concert hall. The attack, carried out by a branch of the so-called Islamic State, is the deadliest in Russia in over 2 decades. But tonight, Russian President Vladimir Putin is suggesting links to Ukraine, despite there being no known connection. Redmond Shannon has our top story and a warning. This report contains distressing images.
Prayers outside the Crocus City Hall on a national day of mourning, marking the unimaginable horror that took place inside the now destroyed venue. The sentiments of Russians similar to those heard after terror attacks elsewhere in Europe and North America. We will become stronger, says this man. President Vladimir Putin did not join the vigil. Instead, the Kremlin released this video of him saying a prayer. Footage of the suspects was broadcast on Russian TV Sunday. The Kremlin says they are from the former Soviet Republic of Tajikistan. Putin says the men were captured while trying to flee to Ukraine, suggesting Ukraine was involved. The country's President Volodymyr Zelensky said Putin is more interested in falsely blaming Ukraine than protecting his own citizens.
He has picked enemies for his own political purposes, for his own ideological purposes. And I think that's a key reason why he disregarded this warning from the United States.
Even in Russia's media bubble, many citizens may have reason to be skeptical of attempts to blame Ukraine.
They have been told for years that the Ukrainians are ruled by evil Nazis, gay Nazis, what some Ukrainians are jokingly calling an Islamist, Nazi, Jewish state.
And in response to Friday's attack, the French Prime Minister Gabriel Attal says his country's national security alert system is now being raised to its highest level. Jackson?
Redmond Shannon in London. Thanks, Redmond. And as Moscow mourns, Russia launched a wave of overnight strikes that targeted Ukraine's capital and hit critical infrastructure in the western Lviv region. Russia fired more than 50 Iranian-made kamikaze drones and cruise missiles at Ukraine, forcing people to shelter in subways. Kyiv says its defenses shot down most of them. Moscow claims to have targeted Ukraine's energy sources. Russia has been pounding Ukraine's power facilities in recent days, last week launching its largest air assault in more than 2 years of full-scale war. One of those Russian missiles briefly entered Poland's airspace, forcing the NATO member to activate its fighter jets and allied air defenses. Poland has summoned Russia's ambassador over the incident and is demanding an immediate explanation from Moscow. The Russian missile crossed into Polish airspace for about 39 seconds. It's not clear if this was intentional behavior by Russia, but even an accidental incursion could risk sparking a wider war. Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant is said to be en route to Washington tonight as the U.S. continues to push Israel to abandon a planned offensive into the southern Gaza city of Rafah. The trip also comes as pressure grows for more aid to be urgently let into Gaza, with the UN saying today the only effective and efficient way to do so is by land. Mike Drolet reports.
The contrast was impossible for UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres to ignore.
On the Egyptian side of the border, aid trucks parked as far as the eye can see. On the Gaza side, a growing humanitarian crisis, or as he put it, a moral outrage.
It's time to truly flood Gaza with life-saving aid. The choice is clear, either surge or starvation. Let's choose the side of help, the side of hope, and the right side of history.
How to get it done? Well, Guterres was diplomatic, calling for Israel to allow humanitarian aid through by road and for Hamas to release Israeli hostages. Food parcels continue to be dropped by air, but aid agencies say only a fifth of what is needed is getting through. Meanwhile, after a late-night Israeli airstrike hit a house in Rafah, Palestinian civilians asked, is anywhere safe? Over 1 million displaced people have sheltered there, which Israel claims is the last bastion for Hamas militants. We fled south as Israel instructed, says this displaced man, yet they come to kill us here? We have nothing to do with this. Israelis, too, seem exasperated at the slow pace of negotiations as Hamas continues to hold hostages kidnapped on October 7th. What were once peaceful rallies in Tel Aviv now routinely become confrontational.
But I want to remind you, everybody, that this has been going on for over 5 months now. And quite frankly, we don't believe that the government is doing everything within its power to get the hostages back.
Talks between Israel and Hamas are ongoing, but the animosity between the two sides is such that negotiations are reportedly being held through intermediaries. Mike Drolet, Global News, Toronto.
137 Nigerian students abducted more than 2 weeks ago have been freed unharmed, according to local officials. The Nigerian army released photos said to be taken shortly after the rescue this morning, showing some of the children being transported on buses. The news comes just days before a reported deadline to pay a $690,000 ransom for their release.
Happy people are happy, jubilating. We are only waiting to see our children so that they have to go under some treatment before they hand over to us.
The mass abduction happened on March 7th during a school assembly in northern Nigeria. More than 280 kids and staff were said to have been taken that day. There's no word on the status of those still believed to be kidnapped. On Friday, 17 other students and a woman were rescued in connection to a different kidnapping in the country. Gangs have seized thousands of people in recent years, especially in the country's northwest. Here at home, a surge in refugee claimants is putting pressure on some of Canada's busiest airports. Ottawa has already cracked down on asylum seekers entering the country by land, leading migrants searching for new pathways into the country. As Touria Izri explains, the issue has become especially contentious in Quebec, which has become the main point of entry.
For refugees flying to Canada, the main destination is Montreal's Trudeau Airport.
It's tiny when you compare it to the refugee flows elsewhere in the world, but it's not. These numbers are not numbers that Canada is accustomed to.
Newly disclosed figures show the sharp increase. In 2022, around 3,300 people made refugee claims at Montreal's airport. That number was almost 10 times higher, at around 30,000 in 2023, the same year Roxham Road shut down, the unofficial border crossing between Quebec and New York State. Immigration experts say because of the closure, asylum seekers are finding new pathways, like airports.
So a large percentage of those claims come from nationals of Mexico. It's a country that does produce a lot of refugees, many of which are genuine and some of which are not.
60% of claims from Mexico are rejected or withdrawn, according to the Immigration and Refugee Board. Last month, under pressure from Quebec, Canada reimposed the visa requirement on Mexican nationals, part of a string of recent announcements on immigration.
It's a delicate balance. There are things we control and things we don't control.
But it can be hard to strike a balance when there's a massive backlog. It can sometimes take years to process cases, and when refugee claims are denied, it can be difficult to remove people. As of last month, the border agency had issued around 30,000 active warrants to failed refugee claimants. Touria Izri, Global News, Ottawa.
Colon cancer is the third leading cause of cancer-related cases and deaths in Canada. The Canadian Cancer Society estimates about 1 in 16 men and 1 in 18 women will develop colorectal cancer during their lifetime. The disease also makes up about 11% of all cancer deaths in the country. While most older adults know the importance of screening, a much younger generation is now confronting an illness they didn't know they had to worry about. Neethu Garcha reports on the urgent push to start testing people decades sooner.
Laura Jean Bainbridge is walking with purpose, 31,000 steps a day during this colorectal cancer awareness month to raise funds for cancer research. 31,000 steps inspired by her diagnosis at just age 31. While active and health conscious, she struggled with Crohn's disease, which put her at higher risk.
I found that it just wasn't getting better, so I said I would like a colonoscopy. I had colon cancer, stage 3.
After chemotherapy and a surgery removing her colon, Bainbridge has been cancer-free since July of 2022. She's been sharing her story in hopes of helping others.
Things like abdominal pain, rectal bleeding, for me it was extreme bloating. If that's repetitive, advocating for yourself in the system so that you get the answers that you need.
Early colonoscopy saved me and my partner's lives. We're 37 and 39.
Bishop Brigante can hardly keep up with the messages he's receiving from cancer patients across Canada.
I'm stage 4 cancer right now, fighting for my life.
His petition to lower colon cancer screening recommendations from age 50 to 30 is gaining momentum.
Early detection is crucial for successful treatment.
I was always told, you got hemorrhoids. Oh, you have irritable bowel syndrome. You have this, you have that.
The Ontario artist says his own fight underscores the dire need for early screening.
If I had waited till I was 50 years old, I'm 45 now, to get a colonoscopy, I wouldn't be alive to be speaking with you right now.
I've been treating patients with colorectal cancer for 20 years. And I think I have never seen a time where I've seen that many patients who are younger than age 50.
BC oncologist Charlene Gill emphasizes the need for candid conversations.
Don't be afraid to talk about change in stool. I think modesty sometimes has really led to people not presenting earlier.
People that are young are at an alarming rate are getting colorectal cancer and they're dying.
As the face of the disease gets younger, advocates say the urgency for more awareness and early intervention is undeniable. Neethu Garcha, Global News, Vancouver.
Eeling and dealing. Coming up, how illegal fishing has forced the shutdown of a lucrative industry in the Maritimes. There is frustration mounting in the Maritimes over a fish so small you'd have trouble spotting it in the water. Elvers, or baby eels, weigh only a few grams, but they're part of a multi-million-dollar industry. But there's been widespread poaching on rivers in Nova Scotia and New Brunswick, despite a recent cancellation of the fishing season. Since March 6th, 34 people have been arrested, 9 vehicles seized, and more than 6 kilograms of the lucrative fish have been confiscated. As Heidi Petracek reports, licensed fishers say enforcement isn't keeping up with the illegal harvest.
Fisherman Stanley King is used to casting nets, but this spring he's been setting up cameras.
Every night we witness illegal activities happening on our trail cams. It's frustrating.
He's reeling in images of shadowy figures carrying nets and buckets in search of immature eels known as elvers. The baby eels swim upstream in coastal rivers at night. They're worth thousands of dollars a kilogram in China and Japan. Earlier this month, concerns over illegal fishing prompted the federal minister to cancel the season, the third shutdown in 5 years.
We've had to put approximately 25 people out of work. The industry as a whole put 1,100 people out of work, and we're scrambling right now.
Mi'kmaq nations asserting treaty rights to fish have also criticized the closure over lack of consultation. Some First Nations have conservation plans with Ottawa to fish, some do not, also adding to tensions.
Because the department wasn't doing anything, you'd have 50 and 60 people down on a river, and maybe you'd have 25 or so or 20 people down there that were just plain bad actors hiding in amongst the people who were expressing a right.
So although at the beginning it was a lot of First Nation fishers exercising their perceived rights, everybody's jumped on the bandwagon now.
The Elvers have just begun to run in rivers like this one throughout the Maritimes. But King says the true test of enforcement against illegal fishing will be next month when the run becomes more intense.
Don't go fish Elver, because if you're caught by a fishery officer, you will be arrested.
Last year, reports of violence closed the fishery early. There were 107 arrests for illegal fishing that year and 112 charges.
We expect the same ratio of charges to arrests this year.
Kerr says officers have made dozens of arrests so far this month, but those who fish legally say the department isn't doing enough. King says what his cameras are netting is proof poachers are still profiting when legal fishers can't. Heidi Petracek, Global News, Hubbards, Nova Scotia.
Ahead, the medical breakthrough in Toronto that could reduce the challenges of epilepsy. March is Epilepsy Awareness Month, and it's an important reminder that more than 300,000 Canadians are living with the challenging condition. But in Toronto, a team at Sick Kids Hospital has completed a medical first that could pave the way for a new form of treatment. Catherine Ward has more on the hope offered by a remarkable implant.
Dr. Elizabeth Donner says medication is the common way to manage seizures, but pills don't work for everyone.
For up to 30% of people living with epilepsy, medication does not work to control seizures. And for those people, epilepsy can be very debilitating.
Different treatments are needed for these patients. One family trying to help their teenager was able to try a groundbreaking procedure here at Sick Kids. In some cases, doctors consider removing portions of the brain, but it wasn't an option in this case.
His seizures were arising from the part of the brain that controls the movement on one side of his body. So if we were to proceed with surgery in that area, we would have left him with very significant weakness on one side of his body.
Instead, the team opted to insert a responsive neurostimulator system into the boy's brain.
It allows us to leave that part of the brain intact and deliver stimulation to the area specifically to try and control the seizures.
Pediatric neurosurgeon Dr. George Ibrahim performed the surgery in August 2023. The hospital says this was the first time it was done in Canada.
It can record activity directly from the brain, and it actually responds to that activity in real time. So in some sense, it's actually highly personalized to an individual's brain.
Gary Collins is the CEO of Epilepsy Canada. His epilepsy can be controlled by medication, but he's hopeful this new treatment will help those who need another option.
I'm very, very happy and optimistic that this, again, will be another methodology that will prove successful.
The family did not want to appear on camera, but Sick Kids says the teen is doing well. These procedures were allowed under a federally regulated program that gives special approval for medication or procedures that have not received full approval. It has been approved for adults in the United States who meet certain criteria. Catherine Ward, Global News.
Helping home. Next, how a Nova Scotia nurse is supporting women and girls' health back in Kenya. Finally tonight, we want to introduce you to a Nova Scotia nurse who's making change on the other side of the world. Emma Muwindi is originally from rural Kenya and knows the challenges women and girls there face in looking after their health. So she started a nonprofit that aims to ship them the kind of supplies that are so often taken for granted in Canada. Ella McDonald reports.
Emma Muwindi grew up in rural Kitui County, Kenya. As the daughter of the only nurse in the community, she was interested in healthcare from a young age. In Kitui, she noticed there was a significant healthcare gap in one area: women's menstrual and reproductive health.
I could see girls missing school, sometimes even to the extent of 5 days every month, because of the embarrassment that comes from sometimes leaking and of the menstrual product and, having to stain their clothes. Some girls would drop out of school. Others would even come to school having used old drugs or even mattress forms.
Now a nurse herself, Muwindi is giving back to her roots through Sauti ya Dada, a nonprofit centered around empowering women. Muwindi founded Sauti ya Dada with 6 friends who are now located all over the world. From her home in Halifax, she is fundraising for the nonprofit to purchase reusable menstrual hygiene kits for women and girls in Kitui.
So we have a kit that has the sanitary pads, the wet package that they use when they use the pads, as well as giving them some detergent and also inner pants.
So far, the group has been able to supply 400 women with menstrual kits, but the battle against period poverty is far from over. In Nova Scotia, menstruating people still miss school or work during their periods due to stigma, an issue groups like United Way are trying to tackle one conversation at a time.
I think the answer is simple. Let's talk about periods. It's not something to hide or be shameful of. It's a natural thing.
With World Menstrual Hygiene Day coming up on May 28th, both United Way and Touria Izri are calling for donations. Muindi hopes her GoFundMe reaches its goal of $2,500 so they can supply 250 more girls with kits in May. Ella MacDonald, Global News, Halifax.
And that's Global National for this Sunday night. I'm Jackson Prosco. Tonight's Your Canada is Michael's Harbour near Lewisport, Newfoundland and Labrador. We always love seeing Your Canada. Please keep emailing your photos to viewers@globalnational.com. Thanks for watching, and I hope you'll join us again tomorrow. Have a great night.